Hi everyone, we're back with our Walk on Water study and we're in week 11 and our theme is presence. When God shows up, everything changes and we're going to see that in our lessons this week. So grab your book and open it up to page 141. And our anchor verse from our Walk on Water story is Matthew 14:32. And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. And so last week we remember how Jesus reached down and rescued Peter, who was sinking. And then this week, Jesus gets in the boat and the wind immediately stops. So pretty incredible what happens when Jesus gets into the boat. Peace arrives with him. So day one, and I just said the verse is Matthew 14:32. And so we're going to talk about in day one is when we feel God's presence strongly. I know I do in my times of peace, because as we learned on day one, when Jesus shows up, peace arrives. The storms are calmed. And Jesus does not always take away the storms and the trials, but he gives us peace through them. So we're going to unpack that a little bit on day one. Day two, we're moving right along, and it's from Psalm 23. So many of us are familiar and have heard it likely at a funeral about the valleys and walking through. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. That's Psalm 23:4. And so, again, God is with us. He tells us over and over again, I am with you. I will be with you. In fact, his final words as he was ascended to heaven was, I will be with you to the end of the age. And we see that in Matthew 28, the Great Commission. And so where do you or when do you feel God's presence most strongly? Is it in the mountaintop experiences or down in the valleys, in the trials of life? So that's what we're talking about on day two. On day three, the story of Job. Besides Jesus, there is no greater story of suffering in the Bible than the story of Job. And we see in Job 42:5-6, after just crying out to God for many, many chapters, 38 in fact, he says in Job 42:5-6, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. And so Job, when he has an encounter with the Lord, his response is he repents. No more questions are needed. And so on day three, we're talking about encounters with God. And so there's lots of good stuff. Day four, this is one of my favorite stories, Wrecking the Roof. So these men bring their friend on a mat and cannot get to Jesus. And I love their determination. I love their faith. They knew by getting their friend in close proximity to Jesus that he could be healed. And so what did they do when it was too crowded to go in through the door? They went up to the roof and cut a hole and lowered him down. I always wonder, what happened? Were pieces falling on Jesus? Who paid the roof bill? I mean, this is a crazy story in Mark 2:3-4. They dug through the roof and lowered the man. So we'll see what happens in that story on day four. And would you be willing to wreck the roof for a friend in need of Jesus? And what are the barriers to doing that? To bringing others to Christ? Something to think about on day four. And we finish strong on day five with good old doubting Thomas. So Jesus showed up and Thomas wasn't there. And so when they heard of Jesus coming back after he was crucified, then they say, we have seen the Lord. And Thomas says in John 20:25, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my fingers where the nails were and put my hand on his side, I will not believe. And so guess what happens? Jesus shows up again right in front of Thomas, and the first words out of his mouth, peace be with you. When Jesus enters the room, there is peace. So Jesus brings peace. But like Thomas found, sometimes we don't feel his presence. Thomas missed it the first time. And so what about our doubt? We've all had doubts. We've all had our doubting Thomas moments. The poor guy, that's the only thing he's remembered for, mainly in the Bible. But what has been our greatest times of doubt? And how do we overcome those times of doubt? How do we overcome when God is silent and we miss his voice? And then we wrap up on day 6, and we're challenged to just think about the Lord's presence and how it changes our lives, and maybe which story resonated with you the most. And then take a step, just one step, based on these lessons on God's presence to grow closer to him. And so that is our recap for week 11 on presence. So, drum roll please, our final chapter, week 12, is worship. So stay tuned for that lesson next week. Thanks so much. Have a great week. Bye-bye.